Today, we become legends.
In November 2014, Smite would make the decision to take Kuang's original kit of abilities, transfer it onto another god, Kuang, and re-release Kuang with a completely new visual design and, more importantly for the topic of this video, a completely new kit design. Little did they know they would create one of, if not the most volatile character design in the entirety of Smite. Quick shout out to my merch collection that I just launched. There's just one design at the moment with the iconic Intersect channel intro of "Today, we become legends" printed in front of Nem's sword. It's available in a bunch of different apparel options like hoodies, t-shirts, crew necks, all that stuff, and it's a great way to directly support the channel and get something nice in return. If there's interest, I'll likely make a few more designs themed around my channel and stuff, but I just want to test the waters with this one as I've not done merch before and I want to see how it goes. Link for the store will be in the description and pinned comment. Huge thanks to anyone that picks up a Become Legends apparel piece, but back to the video. Kuang goes from completely useless to 100% pick ban rate back to completely useless, with buffs and nerfs as small as 10% scaling or a 1 to 2 second cooldown change. These minor changes massively swinging Kuang's performance and pick rate are clear evidence that the god design in itself is somewhat flawed. A 10% scaling buff adds almost negligible damage for most stages of the match. Even in the hyper late game with full build, this will only add mid to high double digit damage, yet somehow changes like this can rocket Kuang from seeing next to no play back to being on top of the meta and people screaming for nerfs. This is best evidenced by how many times Kuang receives a small buff, only for it to be reverted a few patches later when everyone realizes how fundamentally broken Kuang is as a design and he starts dominating ranked games once again. Granted, some of this can be attributed to how the community reacts to buffs and nerfs. We've seen it many times in Smite where a god is seeing little play, receives a small buff, and then is played everywhere and people are screaming for nerfs. The same thing can happen if a god suddenly sees Pro League play after being dormant for a while. It's not always that a god got objectively much better, it can just be that no one realised how strong the god was until a buff hits or the pros start using them. And the same for nerfs to a lesser extent. Many gods can see extremely high pick ban rates while not being as strong as they were originally portrayed, and when they get a minor nerf, they fall out of the meta completely. Back to Kuang though, the core flaw with Ao comes from his ability to hyper carry games on his own. Many gods can do this, with some of the most egregious examples having their own similar issues to Kuang, such as Kali or Freya, but this ability to completely dominate a match means he's extremely frustrating to play against, regardless of if he's objectively strong or not. Ao's entire playstyle actually has a lot of parallels to Loki, another one of Smite's most hated gods that no one ever wants to be on top of the meta or even strong in general. He's a single target focused assassin that plays to nuke one guy in a matter of seconds. In fact, Ao has more staying power in fights than Loki does due to his more auto attack based playstyle, and ability to reset back into the fight after executing a target with his ultimate. You can often dump your kit, execute someone, and by the time you've stayed in the air for a few seconds and dunked onto another target, most if not all of your basic abilities are back off cooldown and you can do it all again. At which point, assuming your team didn't also get nuked, you've probably won the fight. And that execute is a large problem in itself. Having one of these bad boys almost single-handedly makes you a major threat to tanks in the late game, and since tanks and the main class assassins struggle with bursting down, and are also the only class that usually don't get beads, this allows Ao to be a threat to literally everyone on the team. This is compounded by Kuang also having above average tank shred in general because he's more auto attack focused. Not only do auto attacking gods have generally better access to percent pen, but they also have a consistent source of DPS that isn't reliant on cooldowns, which is absolutely preferred when dealing with a class that isn't known for dying in 3 seconds like backliners do. Ability reliant assassins and mages to a certain extent have a much harder time dealing with tanks since they can drop their entire kit on them and only do 50% of their health, at which point they have almost nothing left until their kit comes back up in about 8 to 12 seconds. Ao doesn't really have this problem since doing 50% with his abilities, then auto-attacking a few times to get them into execute threshold, then pressing 4 allows him to still be a major threat to tanks in teamfights. This is partly why hunters and gods such as Kali are harder to balance for teamfights, because they have the potential to sweep the entire team in seconds that traditional burst mages and assassins don't really have. If that kind of playstyle is too strong, it really shows in an obvious way when they wipe the entire team in front of your very eyes. And while I do refer to Kuang as an assassin because of his playstyle, he is technically a mage, and magical basic attacks scale much lower than physical ones. Even when you account for magical power being roughly 2 to 2.5 times as available as physical, magical basic attacks scale at only 20%, while physical ones scale at 100%. So even with the availability considered, Kuang's basics only hit about half as hard as the physical equivalent. But even with this considered, Kuang's Dragon Core with 6 basic attacks still deals 1068 plus 300% magical scaling at level 20, more than enough to delete a squishy in just that ability alone. And since Ao usually has a minimum 2.0 attack speed late game, this damage is dealt over only 3 seconds, actually faster than most ability assassins can get their whole kit off. And with some percent pen, this damage plus his 3 can be close enough to get a tank into execute threshold as well, which ties back to the problem of Ao threatening not just backliners but the whole team. Again, this is a common theme with all basic attacking assassins and basic attackers in general, and it's why you have to be more careful with their balance. At the very least, if a Thor can one-shot your backliner, he's not going to also delete your tanks in 3 seconds. But gods like Kuang, Kali, Bakasura, Hunters, and magical ADCs can do this. So that's the fundamental reason why Kuang is so strong, especially in lower ranks, but even in higher ranks, Kuang does incredibly well most of the time, in fact often better than in the low ranks. It's when we reach pro level that you start to really see this god perform in the same way he does in random ranked and casuals, and that comes from the other side of the coin and provides the reason why he can rise into and fall out of the meta faster than you can say a mighty sword. Kuang has a few problems when it comes to this, but by far the most impactful one is that he struggles a lot against coordinated teams. Lacking CC immunity in his base kit, lacking hard CC for lockdown, having to go all in on one target and being hard countered by beads, all make Kuang much easier to deal with if your backliners can coordinate with the support or even with each other to stop Kuang's dive in its tracks. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is pretty much word for word the exact problem with Loki and why he sees almost no top level play despite being really strong against uncoordinated and lower level opponents. He can sneak into the backline without teammates calling it out, nuke one backliner and then either peace out or continue the fight if no one collapses on him because they're all doing their own thing instead of grouping up and making callouts. This problem for Loki was somewhat mitigated by his rework, and I think he's much more accepted in the community now as a less toxic force, but still a pretty toxic one overall. Kuang is actually worse for this in my opinion due to the factors mentioned previously, such as his threat level to tanks and having access to an execute that also doubles as an escape or re-engage. With Loki, you will either have to blink in and save your ult for chase or escape, or ult in and have zero potential for escape after you all in your target. Kuang, if successful, can survey the whole fight from the sky after nuking one target and choose to disengage or re-engage depending on how the rest of the fight is going. I think this frustration with Kuang is shown best by comparing his win rate, pick rate, and ban rate. In all ranks right now, Kuang has a ban rate of around 70%, peaking in Plat at 74.3% and falling off a bit once you reach GM, the only rank where his ban rate is noticeably below 70%. This is despite his win rate in the vast majority of ranks being just around 50%, generally slightly below 50% for lower ranks and slightly above 50% for higher ones. The exceptions to this being the extremities in Bronze and Grandmasters, where in GM games, Kuang's win rate climbs to 64%, and at that point his ban is actually data justified. But in Bronze, his win rate actually sits just below 40%. Let that sink in for a second. This god wins only 40% of the time in Bronze, but is banned in over 70% of games. For context, the next highest ban rate across all ranks is Hebo at 55%, after that it's Surtur who falls below 50% ban rate. So Ao is significantly higher in ban rate than any other god in the entire game, despite not performing that well across most ranks except GM. I feel this perfectly embodies the way the community feels about this god. It's not even necessarily that we always lose to him, though it can feel that way after losing to a 25-2 Kuang. It's that people just don't want to deal with his shenanigans and face his potential to outright win a match on his own in the right hands and or against a team that's not prepared to deal with him. Again, if this rings any bells, it's because Ao suffers many of the same ills as Loki, and not just because he has invisibility. Will this eventually lead to an Kuang rework to make him less frustrating and polarized as happened with Loki? Probably not. I feel the community sentiment towards Kuang isn't the same as it was and to a certain extent still is with Loki, but I hope this video helped highlight why this god seems to roar into the meta and fade out with a whimper on the slightest buffs and nerfs. It's not that those buffs massively changed his viability, it's that people see a buff and realise Kuang still exists and start playing him again. Which causes a ripple effect of people realising how fundamentally frustrating he is to play against and people start banning him more, leading to the sentiment shifting even more in favour of him being utterly broken, when in reality he barely changed. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Kuang? Do you hate him with a passion and ban him every game, or are you more confident in dealing with him and you leave him open? Should he be minorly reworked like Loki, or should we leave him as is? Let me know down below and I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, and peace out you nerds.